Good evening from Liverpool podcast studios here in Liverpool. Whoop-de-whoop. I'm gonna do a reading from my new book, which is called A Cult of One. Writing this thing was like pulling teeth. It was bloody hard. It took me 3 years to do. I actually haven't read the book front back. So I don't even know if it's good. So what I'm going to read to you now, it's story time with Daddy Grannin, which was the alternative name that Jacob wanted to give it. Can we call this stream Story Time with Daddy Grannin? So it's got a nice ring to it, but let's not. Okay, so this is from chapter 1, which is called The Fight of My Life. By the time the second punch hit me in the jaw, I sensed, even through my drunken stupor, that my face was actually taking on damage. Despite the alcohol, it occurred to me that a speedy response on my part would be required to allay further injury. I used a tie clinch to my opponent's neck and drew him into my shoulder to smother the surprisingly heavy hooks he was landing. That stopped the punches, though I did not know it yet, had permanently dislocated my jaw. We wrestled a little. I couldn't see him because he was so close, and my world was momentarily a claustrophobic, dark space of panting breath, grunts, and the sound of our shoes scuffing the floor as we battled for a dominant position. I released the clinch, and he took the bait. He drew back his meaty fist to hit me again. I saw the opportunity, and I caught him squarely in the nose with a pretty solid headbutt, sending blood squirting down his T-shirt. This is a book on overcoming codependency, isn't it? It's very violent.
You wrote it.
Who wrote this? Headbutting people in the nose. My opponent was a solidly built Greek man, squat and girthy. Oh, he had clearly trained, as his jaw-breaking punches had shown me, and beneath this fat was real strength. He went in with an upper body clinch to prevent further skull-to-nose contact, and as he wound me into an over-under clinch, I felt the fear that something terrible might befall me. I responded with a jumping guard. This is a move from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you hold the opponent in a clinch and jump up, wrapping your legs around his torso and dragging him to the ground. You end up on your back. This sounds disadvantageous, I know, but if you know your submissions, it's a potentially good strategy. The trick is that you must be comfortable delivering arm bars or triangle chokes. Let me say this, it's fine in competition, and it works great on a safe matted surface in the gym. However, I would not recommend doing it on a tarmac footpath, as I did that evening. My spine and the back of my head clonked onto the hard path, and my body loudly announced that I had done something both stupid and injurious to my person. I pulled him into a deep, closed guard to keep him from using those sheep-shearing Greek farmer's fists on my face any further. That's funny, that, Jacob. That made me laugh, that. Sheep-shearing farmer's fists. Oh, I tell you what. My jaw was dislocated and my left eye was rapidly closing up. I was prepared to triangle choke or arm bar him when he inevitably posted up, meaning he tried to push away and get upright with his arms. He was ready to go on punching my face into oblivion. Luckily, the now dreaded farmer's fists of ancient Sparta never landed, as if by some far-off signal heard only by the two of us, locked in that intimate embrace. We simply stopped. It was over. Our bodies agreed. I unlocked my position and we both stood up and looked at each other, a little bewildered. His nose was mashed. My face was blowing up like a pumpkin. The skirmish was brief and violent and left us both a little shocked, I think. We staggered away from each other, perhaps with a little more respect for the other than at the initiation of the event. He left holding his newly reconfigured nose, and me, my mashed mandible. This was a fight that I got into at York University at 2 a.m. after about 6 solid hours of drinking. It was one of many I mysteriously found myself in as a 20-something. I only fought when I could see that a friend was in real danger. The problem was that I had idiotic and reckless friends. Privileged kids from private school who enjoyed the adrenaline rush of a brawl. They got away with a few bumps and scrapes. I, on the other hand, had an eye that was completely closed for 3 days, and my bite is still not aligned properly 2 decades later. Bearing the burden of other people's poor decisions cheerfully is something of a theme in my life. At age 21, as a devout martial arts enthusiast, I had a penchant for getting into fights with the kind of delusional confidence in my own indestructibility which is only afforded to those young enough to know no better. I had not internalized truths that I now consider to be self-evident. For example, there are bigger, tougher, nastier people out there. Even if you beat them, they might come to your house. If you're not in, they will deliver their vengeance to whomever is. Or even if you win, the bigger your win, the more jail time you can get, and the nastier the prison you can end up in. Or simply, I really, really, really don't want to go to prison. Ever, not even for fraud in Denmark in one of their famous luxury 5-star jails. And most importantly, the body can break, and the injuries can be lifelong. These things had to be learned with time, bitter experience, and suffering. In my younger, dumber days, I used to let people have the first shot. Such was my undue confidence. I was also convinced that everyone who started fights or willingly got into fights didn't actually know how to fight. That turned out not to be true. There are people out there who are professional fighters who enjoy starting shit when drunk and high specifically for the thrill of using their skills in what is essentially justified assault. So when I met the aforementioned stout Greek student who, it turned out, had served in the Greek army and could actually fight, I received what we might call in therapy feedback from reality. My assumptions about the world, that I was indestructible, that justice was somehow on my side because I hadn't started the fight, did not pass what is known in psychology as the reality test. My cracked jaw was the feedback needed to knock a hole in my worldview. It did me some good, but the towering wall of arrogance I lived behind would require a few more knocks yet. My friends, I now see looking back, started fights knowing that I would assist them. They also did it to enjoy the spectacle of watching me go. They were not rough types, far from it. They were the wealthy kids of doctors, lawyers, and accountants who lived in mansions in Cheshire with tennis courts and swimming pools. They really just liked the buzz of a tear-up without having to contend with the consequences. When I say being the one to come off worse is a recurrent theme in my life, I mean that I was usually some variation of the peacekeeper, the burden bearer, or black sheep. If someone were going to get left carrying the can, it would most likely be me. Why was I willing to sacrifice myself and my face for my friends? It's a question I didn't even begin to ask myself until I was in my 30s. By then, I was desperately trying to pull myself out of a spiral of alcohol, drugs, promiscuity, violence, and abusive relationships. It's the standard night out in Liverpool, really, Jacob. The answer I found was rooted in my childhood and in a series of poor decisions that sent me careening towards self-destruction when what I really wanted all along was love and safety. It is the same issue that many of us face today. Not being able to love, as my Jordan Peterson moment. There's just not enough love, you know. Not being able to love or take care of ourselves properly, not being able to put our needs first, not being able to ask for or go for what we truly want, feeling compelled to attach ourselves to selfish people, and trying to win love from those who cannot offer it. This doesn't only apply to our personal relationships. It can expand to include our health, our business lives, and even our relationships with our governments. It all comes down to a fractured self, the need to be servile, and the codependent and toxic attachments we form to tyrannical people, institutions, and governing bodies. I experienced these same problems myself. Self-destructive behavior, trying to please the needs of the worst kinds of people at my own expense, abusive relationships, addictions to sex, to violence and to drugs, social anxiety, awkwardness, self-loathing, and depression. In order to solve these problems, I first needed a term to describe their root cause. I chose the term codependent. In using this term, I'm going a little beyond the boundaries of the way it is typically used. When I use the term codependent, I mean a person who is traumatized and brainwashed into needing to be a slave to abusive, psychopathic, narcissistic, tyrannical types of people and systems in order to feel in any way meaningful, visible, or alive. When I say codependent, I mean a person who has been so thoroughly and consistently abused and objectified, they end up colluding in their own self-eradication. That person may have internalized the abuse to such a degree that they will maintain or even further their self-destruction in the absence of the abuser. Expanding this definition allowed me to understand how I had transformed from a bright, well-educated boy who'd been planning to apply to Cambridge into a fat, broken, bitter, nearly homeless nightclub bouncer who snorted cocaine off a house key in a club toilet before returning to work. I didn't write that. That's the editor. And I feel judged. That's harsh, that. So...
Someone said, ouch.
Yeah. Bloody hell, that. See, I knew I should have proofread this. So how did I get there so quickly? And then less quickly, how did I dig myself back out? First, let's take a look at the classical meaning of the term codependent. Originating from Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, the term referred largely to the partner of an alcoholic who was the enabler of the alcoholism. It was a non-clinical definition that some counselors and therapists used, while many others rejected because it could be as confusing as it was enlightening. Later, in the 1980s, the term gained popularity in best-selling pop psychology books in the USA to describe women, in particular, who were overgiving in relationships and who lacked boundaries. Oh no. Janet G. Wojciech's, I hope I got that right, Adult Children of Alcoholics came out in 1983. It sold 2 million copies and stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 48 weeks. Robin Norwood's Women Who Love Too Much, 1985, sold 2.5 million copies and spawned 12-step groups across the country for women who were addicted to men. Melody Beattie popularized the concept of codependency in 1986 with the book Codependent No More, which sold 8 million copies. These wildly successful books in the 80s massively increased the usage of the term codependency, though they are now sometimes viewed a bit sniffily by the academic community as being popularized by self-help gurus. The consensus at the time was that the term became overused, misapplied, and eventually misused. Nowadays, it's understood to be a layman's term for hyperagreeableness and possibly a clinically diagnosable dependent personality disorder. Today, in psychology, the term codependent might raise a few eyebrows, but it's not wildly controversial, and everyone knows pretty much what you mean if you use it. But what do I mean when I say it, and why do I use it? When I think of a codependent state, I visualize two circles overlapping. Each circle represents a person, and as the circles overlap, each person has entered the other's space. When we have two people in each other's spaces, we have weaknesses in key areas. Boundaries, the sense of self, agency, sovereignty, responsibility, assertiveness, directness, clarity, emotional regulation, and independence. When I think about sovereignty or independence, I think of an unbroken circle that stands alone. Here we have an unbroken perimeter and no porous or weak boundaries, like a single cell that is functional. The good things that the cell needs to nourish itself stay inside, and the bad things that are toxic to the cell stay outside where they belong. When I visualize the two circles overlapping, sometimes I imagine a strong circle drawn with a thick line, overlapping with a weak circle whose perimeter is drawn with dots. I think of the strong dominant circle dwarfing and overpowering the smaller, weaker circle. This represents a codependent relationship becoming truly toxic and even abusive. The unbroken circle is independent. The overlapping circles, one being submissive and the other parasitic, are codependent. In my opinion, there is no such thing as a neutral state of codependency. When boundaries are infringed upon and we are in each other's spaces or carrying each other's loads, I believe that the situation is always somewhere on the spectrum of toxicity and manipulation. Imagine a scenario wherein a girl aged 26 decides it's time to settle down and get with an older, more responsible man to build a future together. She finds a guy who's aged 35, who has a job, is charming and charismatic, and says he wants a family one day. When they actually move in together, however, she finds that on a daily basis, his actions reflect a desire not for long-term future building, but for passing pleasure. Drinking with friends, playing video games, and going out to restaurants. He doesn't seem to save money and isn't interested in her conversations about mortgages or pension schemes. In an effort to make the relationship work, she then begins to pick up his slack. After all, he's not abusive. Maybe he just needs a nudge in the right direction. At that moment, to help him be an adult, she has chosen to carry his responsibilities for him. Whatever happens next in this story, be it 3 months later or 13 years later with kids involved, she will feel the weight of resentment for doing his adulting for him. He, of course, will remain blissfully unaware. Instead of reciprocating or meeting her where she is, he will simply let this happen, thinking, wow, my girl is so cool. She does this so that I could just chill. It's not dramatic or film-worthy. Technically, it's not even really abuse, but it's absolutely a codependent relationship and will lead to terrible problems in the future. Going back to our two circles, we can see that the small circle represents the codependent victim, but the two circles are both engaged in a codependent mode of being. Does that mean that the big circle, the abuser or predator, is codependent? In my view, any person who is not openly expressing their intent in an adult way and whose sense of self or purpose in the world is dependent on a singular other or multiple others is indeed codependent. Not all would agree. The small circle in our overlapping circles is what I call an echo. It does not self-direct and it is not attached to its own source. It is like a moon reflecting the light of the sun. It does not radiate for itself, it only reflects. The big circle radiates light, but its light cannot be seen without a reflection. That's where the small circle comes in. So this book, A Cult of One, it's available now on Amazon. It's done really well so far. It's only been out a couple of weeks, and it was an Amazon bestseller in the UK and USA for a little bit there. Feedback's good. The main objective of the book is to teach people to get a different perspective on narcissistic abuse and codependent relationships, and really to overcome codependency, to grow up, to become an adult, and to individuate in the Jungian sense from these unconscious patterns of behavior that we usually pick up in childhood, because we were probably all raised in families where a certain degree of codependency was present in our parents and in, other family members and other role models we had around us. So that's my little read in there, and I hope you enjoyed it. And now we'll take questions. Jacob, have you seen any good ones?
There's a lot of people asking if there's going to be an audio book.
Yeah, I'm going to record the audio book this month at a studio in San Diego. I don't know exactly where yet. I don't organise that. That's organised for me by the publishers. But yeah, this month. And then once that's recorded and done, it will be available, I think, by Christmas.
Here's a question. Can you read that? Do you want me to read it out?
You read it to me, Jacob.
Are self-mummifying monks narcissists? Do they want everlasting admiration? I've been trying to ask Sam Vaknin this for 5 years.
Well, you can ask Sam if you want to, but he's not going to be able to answer you. I don't think you can say that. I don't think you can say that the monks who you're talking about the Buddhist practice. I don't know where it's done. There's only some countries where it's done. There's only some schools of Buddhism that would even allow this. But they basically go through a ritual where, they make it easier and more likely that their bodies can be mummified. Is it a narcissistic endeavor? Possibly, and that's why it's banned in most schools of Buddhism. I can't actually remember. I think Thailand allows it. maybe Japan, but I'm not an expert on it. Do they want everlasting admiration? I don't know. I mean, it's a worthwhile question. You can't say that it's NPD. You could say that the impulse is narcissistic. You could say the impulse isn't very Buddhist. It seems to be a bit attached to the material world. It's also a sort of a spiritual competition because not everybody has the discipline to be able to do this. So they're sort of competing in how spiritual they are, which it seems to run against the central thesis of Buddhism.
What about this one? Hola, what's going on in here?
Hello, Psychic Dashed in the Vampire Slayer. What's going on in here? I don't know, lads, this and that. Getting up to all kinds of mad things, doing book readings.
Is Tribe of One like Cult of One?
I don't know Tribe of One. Sorry, never heard of that.
No, me neither. There's a lot of statements in here.
Yeah, so folks, if you could...
A lot of statements.
Welcome to my world, Jacob. So let me just guide people a little bit. What would be most useful for everybody watching is if you ask questions that are sort of pertinent to the topic, which is overcoming narcissistic abuse, childhood trauma, codependency, have them be 1 or 2 sentences long and end in a question mark rather than just making statements.
Does it cover what a healthy relationship should look like?
No. Because I don't fucking know what a healthy relationship should look like. I'm not going to teach you to do something I've never done. I would say, I can help you to deal with CPTSD. I can help you overcome childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, but I can't teach you to do something I've never done. I have healthy relationships that are like friendships. But once it becomes romance and intimacy, no, it's an absolute shit show for me.
Does the book give you ways to close the gaps in the circle?
Yes, the book gives you ways to close the gaps in the circle. That's the predominant thrust of the book. It's the predominant thrust of my work, really, is to make these porous ego boundaries, is to heal them. All of these gaps, all of these pores in the ego boundary are a kind of appeal to mercy. They're a kind of asking for relief and asking for help. So there's a childishness to codependency. There's a childishness to the cluster B personality disorders as well, which is why we hang out with the cluster B personality disordered people as codependents. We're not in a different terrain to them. We're in the same terrain. We just express it differently. And we're still, in transactional analysis terms, we're still children appealing to a parent. We're hoping that some mother figure or father figure is going to take the pain away or stop torturing us. So that's what all the pores are. And in a sense, you have to give up on that. That's part of growing up. That's part of becoming an adult and individuating. And even if you don't have a mental health issue and you wouldn't consider yourself codependent or having CPTSD, all human beings struggle to do this, to let go of childhood. I mean, we're individuating from childhood in many ways. There are a lot of dreams that have to die. And one of the dreams that has to die is nobody is coming to save you. Nobody's coming to save you. If you want to close that circle, you have to embrace the fact that you save yourself.
There are quite a lot of questions coming through now, actually.
Good, because I gave him a bit of guidance, Jacob, you know what I mean?
Trying to pick the good ones.
Just nudged them in the right direction.
Are you interested in exploring the relationship between current public governance, social policies, and increased codependency?
I am. I've signed up for a documentary, part of which will be shot here in November. It's not my documentary, it's somebody else's, but I said I would hire Jacob and hire the Liverpool Podcast Studio space for my section of the documentary. The problem is with doing it on YouTube is we live in very interesting times. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Russell Brand, with his 5 million or 6 million subscribers, he's been issued a very strange warning by YouTube. He now has a permanent warning, a lifetime warning on his account, where if he says one more thing that's outside the ill-defined boundaries of what YouTube will and won't allow us to say as YouTube creators, he will receive a lifetime ban and he'll lose all that work and the 5 million subscribers. So Hey, so that's what Jacob thinks of that. Fuck's sake. So yeah, I am interested in exploring it, but we do live in a time where you have to be very, very careful doing that. And all of these videos and everything will be monitored by AI in 5 years in the future and will affect your social credit score. Scary. And they'll just switch off your electric car and worse, all your porn.
What was the pivotal moment that you decided to share your experience to help others?
What was the pivotal moment that I decided to share my experience to help others? I don't know. I hated sharing my experience. I didn't want to. When I first wrote this book, it was twice the size. It was pretty academic and stuffy and instructional, about 80,000 words. And I'd written it just after my knee surgery when I was in a leg brace. I couldn't walk and the pandemic had started. And in the UK, we were allowed out the house for 1 hour a day of exercise. And that's when I wrote this book. And it didn't have much of me in it. But then when I took it to the publishers, they were very kind and gentle and American about it. But they basically told me it was boring and that I had to put more of myself into it. And that's when it became like pulling teeth. It then took me another 2 years to write a book that had me in it. Because I don't know, maybe because I'm English or maybe because I was in boarding school or something. I have serious issues around privacy. And even when I did it, and I did it in accordance with what they asked for, they wanted more. So there's no descriptions in this book of the specifics of the abuse I experienced in childhood. And they did ask me 5 times and I refused 5 times and I think they just fucking gave up. It was like, he's not going to say. And maybe it would be something I would talk about one day, but I'm absolutely not ready to do it now. And I know there'll be catastrophic consequences for real people in the real world, and other than me, there'll be catastrophic consequences for other people. So I don't really want to talk about it. So no, there wasn't like a moment where I was like, oh God, I have to tell my story to reveal the details of my life. The details of my life were squeaked out of me for this. If there was a moment that I could remember that was pivotal, that's adjacent to your question, it's during the 80,000 word academic stuffy version of this book that was in March, April of 2020 during the lockdown. I was also reading Dave Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. Dave Goggins, the Navy SEAL, and I think he also qualified. He passed Rangers as well. And he shared he was vulnerable about some of his childhood abuse. That was helpful. And in the same week, I was reading Douglas Murray's Madness of Crowds. And he was giving like an in-depth description of a trans person's subjective experience and an analysis of that. And I was like, oh, this is quite heavy. Especially when I was on my own during that time. So I couldn't really move. As I say, leg in a brace, writing all the time, out for an hour a day of exercise, but I was doing it on crutches. And it obviously a lot of that environment led me to go inward, and it became a therapeutic experience, but the one that I dealt with on my own. And at a certain point of thinking about this and writing about this whilst reading those 2 other books, I sort of realized that due to some of the experience I'd had as a child, I didn't really regard myself as being human in the way that I looked at other people as being human. I didn't afford myself that same status. And that was a very definite moment where I was like, oh, okay, that's probably not good. I should probably do something about that. And because that's the nature of childhood abuse. You internalize it as being you that did it. It's not logical, but it is what happens. And I saw myself as a sort of a monster, as a golem-like creature. And then I thought, oh well, I suppose I'm going to have to share more of my experiences around this because other people will read this and it'll help them. I then have a responsibility to. So I eventually stopped being grumpy with my American editors and was like, fine, I will give you some personal stories. Here you go. That was it. That's as close to a pivotal moment as I had, but I still didn't want to do it.
Does the book explore more in depth the codependency between us and the governing bodies?
No. No, it's not. It's touched on again and again because it was written in 2020 and in 2021, where I watched, people, institutions, media outlets, culture fall into a mass hysteria of codependency. So it was on my mind. But during that time, I also received 2 medical misinformation strikes on YouTube for, well, I can't actually say the words why, because I could get my channel closed permanently. So I leaned back on that kind of thing. I think I did some work on Iconic. So I work, it's David Icke's sons, and I work with them sometimes. So I spoke about it more there, but that's not in the public eye. That's behind a paywall. I'd be happy to explore it more. I don't know how I would. I'd probably have to use fiction or something as a guise to do it, but it's not in this book. No, it's not the right time.
What do your immediate family members think of you discussing your childhood publicly?
Well, I was very careful about what I did and didn't say. So it was carefully written because, this isn't a poison pen book. It's not written to take vengeance on anybody or to hurt anyone. I don't feel the need to take revenge on anybody for anything that happened. So it was written fairly sensitively. But everybody I know who was involved has already read it. I have a good relationship with my family, including people who, were maybe not that nice to me when I was a kid. And they know that they can talk to me if they want to.
Is there any content other than your personal life stories in the book that you haven't covered in your YouTube videos?
Yeah, I think a lot of the content that focused on echo codependency particularly, and how echo codependency manifests from childhood trauma, that's a big part of the book that wouldn't have been shared on YouTube videos. The effect of martial arts on my life, I've kept off this channel because, I don't know, the spiritual / mystical experience and or psychotic episodes that I had in Malaysia that led to this channel, this project being born back in 2013 with the Sufi master, my Sufi master, I think I can call him. I didn't talk about that on this channel because up until 2 years ago, talking about Islam was a really, really hot topic, and you had to be very, very careful. But in the book, I do talk about that experience, and I touch on elements of Islamic belief. And part of my experience was in Malaysia. The guy's a Sufi. It was fundamentally Islamic what happened. So that's explored in greater depth in the book. I think there's things that you can say in writing that impact your brain differently. That if I say them, like when you read somebody's writing, you're reading my words in your voice inside your head. And sometimes I think that can be a gentler experience if you want to explore certain subject matter. Obviously, I can scream inside of your head as well. Anybody who's read Nietzsche or Schopenhauer can tell you that. But I felt much safer doing it in writing. Not in the sense that I'm scared that somebody's going to run up and stab me, but like that I felt safe that I could get the message across better. If it's written in a chapter, people are more likely to read it all, and you have to read the whole story to get the full context. Whereas if it's on social media, it becomes immediately like a flex. It's a competition. I'll have, wannabe imams telling me I'm a kuffar and, swearing at me in Arabic and stuff. And I just didn't. So that's why I didn't do it here.
Were your own people-pleasing tendencies triggered while writing the book, thinking about whether the audience will like it? I know the answer to this one.
Well, I mean, if this is, codependency is a really tricky one. If this is what you are, like CPTSD, Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is considered to be one of the most difficult things to treat in the therapeutic setting. But mechanistically, from an engineering sort of point of view, I don't think complex post-traumatic stress disorder is all that complex, in fact. I think that we can make it more complicated than it needs to be. There are like 3 or 4 separate clusters of symptoms that come from 3 or 4 places that, with consistency and discipline over time, maybe you don't eradicate it, but you can turn them all down. And then it's way easier to just do actual therapy. As a counterexample, codependency, the way I'm describing it, means that you are fundamentally codependent in your nature with reality. I think it was Pete Walker. I nearly called him CPTSD. He has his own name, Pete Walker, who has guided like 99% of my thinking around CPTSD. Described an anecdote where he bumped into a table and said, sorry. So that's a fundamentally codependent relationship with reality. And I resonate with that. Writing the book was a test. It took a long time. There were many, many drafts. It was an enormously triggering experience. And it led really to one of the toughest periods of my life, because I didn't realize that I should have been in therapy whilst writing the book. And then I was in therapy 4 days a week for a couple of months. Once that draft was in, it was really tough. But was I worried whether the audience would like it? Not from that point of view. Because, no false humility. I knew it was a good book. I knew it was readable. I had a really good editor. She was brilliant. She wasn't going to let me write a load of self-indulgent shite. So I was confident that the book itself was good. So from the writing point of view, because I didn't want to write a shitty book, I wanted a solid 7 out of 10, no perfectionism. And we achieved that. And then the content, I was like, no, people are going to like this. This is going to be good. I generally speaking, I don't wring my hands over whether the audience will like it, because there's an audience for everything. There's an audience for absolutely everything. So I'm weird. We're all weird in this particular shape, in this particular way. And there will be an audience for that. And then there's other people who won't be able to stand me at all, which I feel the same way about other people. Like there's some people I just don't want to listen to. So no, the people pleasing was triggered, but not in the way you mean, where I was like, oh, I hope they like me. I was like, I don't give a fuck if they like me or not. But I've been at this for years. I'm very tough in that regard. Very, very tough. I'm very well practiced in that regard. I wouldn't say people should try and model that behavior without 10 or 12 years of doing what I've been doing online.
Is your book available anywhere other than Amazon?
I don't know. I don't own a copy of the book. I've never held a copy of the book. When I told you I haven't read it, this is the first time I've done a reading of it. I really don't. Now it's out. I really don't want to touch it that much. So I swear to God, I do not know where it's available from. You'll have to look.
A lot of people were raging that you weren't reading from a hard copy.
Yeah, no, I've never held a hard copy. I don't. They're in my mother's house. Isn't that Freudian? Well, the publishers just sent them to me when I was out of the country. I was like, why are you sending me a load of my own books? They're like, this is what we fucking do. I was like, great. Thanks for that. So now they're sat in a garage. I'll do a thing in London where I just take all of those books to a place somewhere in Heathrow, to a hotel, and we'll just do like a seminar and a book signing and just fucking get rid of them.
How do we find counsellors like you?
You don't.
Well-read, thoughtful,
Yeah,
wise,
sexy,
up on cutting-edge philosophies. Every counsellor I've tried is a muddy puddle when I need a deep pool. Very well put.
I mean, they are out there. I found, like, when I was went back into therapy last year, which I really desperately needed to do, I went through a counselling directory. You have them in America, you have them in Australia, you have them in Canada, we have them in the UK. You don't have to use the people in your country. You can do Zoom counselling sessions and Skype counselling sessions. Go and look, go and try. They will all give you a free interview, and you can just say, look, I've had bad experiences and I know what I'm looking for and I haven't found it yet. Can we have a chat for 15 minutes? And they'll all say yes, even like the really expensive ones, or they'll tell you they're too busy. I mean, and if they're too busy, they're too busy. That's the way it is. But there are good people out there, and you shouldn't use this as an excuse. I mean, I've had terrible counseling experiences, awful therapeutic experiences. And for a period of my life, I was watching other people deliver therapy, and I have horror stories of things that I watched therapists and counselors, quite famous therapists and counselors, say to clients, even when they knew they were being watched by me, professionally observed. So I know some are mind-bogglingly bad. Like, really, they're going to re-traumatize you or give you a fresh trauma. But don't give up, because old school talk therapy can really, really, really help a lot. You should have somebody in your life who's got no skin in the game other than that they're a professional who you pay, who's a separate adult who lives outside your life as a planet, and you can talk to them and they can reflect back what you're saying to them, and they will help you to think more clearly. Once a week, 1 hour a week, it'll save you from a lot of catastrophes, I assure you.
There's not that many more that are about the book. Do you want me to read like more general ones?
Yeah, more general ones. If I can guide you back again, folks, like try and ask questions that are related to overcoming codependency, narcissistic abuse, CPTSD. That would be great. You can ask other questions as well, of course.
I'll read this one because he's asked it a few times.
Yeah, sure.
Richard, is it normal to have days where you feel like you hate everyone, even though you know it's not true? How do I overcome this?
I mean, it's normal for me. I'm having one of those days today. I mean, is it normal? I don't really know what you mean when you say, is it normal? If you're in front of me, I'd say, what does that mean to you, RMPC? Is it normal? Are you asking if it's okay? Yes, it's okay that you have days where you feel like you hate everyone. Are you asking if other people have those days? Yes, I assure you that other people also have those days where you feel like you hate everyone. You say that you know it's not true. Well, that's where good therapy comes in. That's where a good therapist comes in, because I think it was Jung that said the purpose of all of the therapist-patient relationship is that the therapist brings you back to truth. So there's still a Socratic philosophical bedrock to the therapeutic process that we'll never escape, and we don't need to escape, which is it's the dialectic. It's this is what I believe to be true subjectively. This is what I know is probably more likely to be true at an objective level, and then trying to find some sort of integration between the two. But a good therapist is bringing you back to truth. They're helping you to think more clearly, and through thinking more clearly, to feel more clearly. It's our emotional dysregulation that warps our perceptions. So you, like you say, you probably really don't hate everybody. I'm sure you don't. But there are days where you'll be full of rage. So therapy is good. Seeking to emotionally re-regulate would massively help. I have a free course for doing that. It's called the Fortress Mental Health Protection System. It's available on YouTube, Fortress Mental Health Protection. It's completely free. And you follow that course and it will help you to become more emotionally literate and to emotionally regulate yourself. And you'll have fewer days where you hate everyone. And if you do have a day where you hate people, it'll last an hour instead of 7 hours.
Just quickly, because I've got some new viewers. People are saying, how do I read the book? It is on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. It's called A Cult of One. It's about lighthouses and clouds. It's an exploration of the lighthouse. I know it's on Amazon Australia, Amazon America. I saw somebody before ask if we're going to translate it to German. We might do. It depends on how it sells. Possibly we'll look at translating it to other languages as well.
Someone also asked why the word cult. Are you trying to provoke? I've had a few questions about that.
Cult. Well, I hired people to help me to get this book done. My title, the original title for the book was weaker. My title for the book was Just an Echo, because the book is predominantly about a type of codependency that I'm calling echo codependency. So the working title was Just an Echo, but it's not. They were right. They got hold of me and they shook me a little bit, as they did for a lot of things. And it's all women. I've been bullied by a team of professional women into doing this book differently. You see, it's a matriarchy we live inside of, Jacob. All this talk of patriarchy is nonsense. And I think they were right. I think they did the right thing. Where did Cult of One come from? I think we did like a marketing branding style call where we did some sort of an exercise where she wanted me to just clear my mind of everything that I thought about the book up until that point and just describe a codependent narcissistic relationship to her. And we booked to do it for 45 minutes. And inside of the first 3 minutes, we came up with the title, The Cult of One. It was like a Freudian word association type thing. And it was like, what is this like? What is happening to the codependent? What is happening with the narcissist? And I was like, well, it's like cult brainwashing. It's like the love bombing stage of a cult, which is why we use cult language, trauma bonding, love bombing. This is language from cult psychology, because narcissistically abusive relationships do play out like a cult, and they are effectively a cult of one.
I think we've got one here from a good friend of ours, Mr. D. Williams.
There's more than one D. Williams. There's a different D. Williams that posts here as well.
I'm joking. Now that the book is published, do you feel that the process of getting those feelings out was cathartic or healing?
Was it cathartic or healing? I think that the most honest and most spontaneous answer I can give to you is no. There wasn't a sense of relief having it done. The only relief was more like, that's a project that I finally finished after 3 years of going backwards and forwards on it. Was it a weight off my chest or a catharsis in writing it? No, not really. There are other books that are in the pipeline that probably would have more of that sort of a feeling. This was more of there was a lot that I wanted to say that I couldn't draw all the strands together on a YouTube channel to say them. And where I have tried to say them, the problem with YouTube as a format, we all think of YouTube as being a video platform, but what YouTube really is a forum with videos on it. So it's a forum where every day there's a new topic or post on the forum that then people start going through. So it's actually quite a crap place to try and bring all the strands together, unless you do a video every 8 weeks with a whiteboard and you say, these are the subjects that we've been covered in the last 8 weeks. Now let's pull them all together here. So there was a cohesion of ideas that needed to occur. And that's what this book is. That's not a bad idea for YouTube videos here, actually. Trying to do a cohesive every once in a while. Yeah.
Do you have plans to write another book?
Yes, I do. I want to do a fiction next time.
Right, well.
A fictional version of my life.
Have we done this one? Does your book touch on dissociation and how to deal with this?
No, it's not really a book on dissociation as such, but it does touch on. Well, no, the word dissociation does come up in the book a few times, because the book discusses the trauma responses, and dissociation is a trauma response. It's a primal biological. It's the most basic primal biological response in evolutionary terms. Every animal, even simpler animals, freeze. So our first instinct, our first in terms of evolution, and our first instinct as human beings is to freeze. So what you'll hear in the CPTSD community, and it's a useful way of doing things, to say, oh, I'm a fight responder, I'm a fawn responder, I'm a flight responder. Yes, that's true, and it's useful to think that way, but we all are freeze responders. Freezing is the first response. Freezing is the deepest response. Freezing is the baseline response. And the more overwhelming the trauma, the more likely you are to drop into freezing, which is what dissociation is. So dissociating is checking out of a reality that you can't escape, which is, if you think about it, it's the last line of defense. You can't fight. You can't negotiate. You can't fight, which is the fight response. You can't negotiate, which is the fawn response. You can't run away, which is the flight response. You're stuck. You're going to get eaten. You're done for. So do you want to be associated or dissociated for the eating experience? And as animals, as mammals, we dissociate. There's an adaptation, I think, in zebras and antelopes where when they're really done and they are being eaten, their bodies flood with, a cocktail of hormones that reduce pain and basically just zonk them out of the experience of being eaten alive. How do you deal with it? You need to recover from CPTSD. You need to recover from your emotional flashbacks. So what's happening now is as you go into an emotional flashback, you will have a pronounced freeze response to cope with the overwhelming stress of the emotional flashbacks. So if you deal with them, you emotionally re-regulate. There's a lesson on how to do that on the Fortress Mental Health Protection YouTube channel. Seek therapy and find more adaptive, better strategies for dealing with stress.
Okay. With the hand mnemonics, do we need to use the exact words you give?
No.
I struggle to remember stuff, so this is a general idea helpful, or should I write them down to recite?
You should do what works the best for you. I've been mocked for the hand mnemonic exercise. People say, this guy thinks that tapping your fingers is going to heal childhood trauma. I don't care if you tap your fingers, your toes, your nose, your ears, or if you hum a song. The point is that 5 times a day, you're going to show up for yourself and you're going to remind yourself of certain truths that, let's say, neurotypical or people who haven't experienced trauma already live as unconscious coordinates. Things like, I can say no. Things like, if a situation is uncomfortable, I can leave. Things like, I should check in and see if I have any needs that need to be fulfilled right now. Most people who are not traumatized and haven't had that brain washed out of them do it spontaneously. We don't. So 5 times a day, we need to find a way to remember, which is what the word mnemonic means. It's a memory aid to check in with ourselves and just be like, okay, is there something I should be saying no to right now? Is there something I need right now? Can I communicate what I want more effectively right now? The exact words that I use, if people cleave to them and are like, I have to say it this way, it makes me feel better because it came from this guy and I believe this guy is an authority, then that's fine. But that really is Dumbo's magic feather. I've given you 5 things to focus on, but there might be other things that are more important for you to focus on. The thing is to remind yourself that you do have choices and that you can take care of yourself and that you can show up for yourself. The hand mnemonic exercise is fundamentally about showing up for yourself as an adult with potency and sovereignty in your own life.
This is an interesting one. Would recording yourself talking about the trauma and listening back at a later time be beneficial if traditional therapy isn't an option?
You really, really should do traditional therapy. You really, really should consider that first. However, there is a lady I've worked with several times. She's from round here. I don't know whether she's from Liverpool or the Wirral. And her background, she introduced me to CPTSD. She introduced me to Pete Walker. There's a video on my YouTube channel of her doing that. You can see it happening live, me learning about the fight, fawn, freeze response. Her name is Amanda. And she wrote a book on therapeutic styles for dealing with childhood abuse. And she developed that with another psychologist who's local. And one of their methods was to record. I think the client would write down the traumatic experience. They would read what they'd written. The therapist would record it. And then a week later, they would play it back to them. And I think there was published research on it that said that this was therapeutically useful. To what degree, I don't know. But yes, that was an option that she explored. You really should get guidance from a therapist as well.
What's so special about sex?
I like it. Do you like it, Jacob?
I like it.
Yeah, it feels nice.
Why is sexual trauma in a category all on its own? What makes it worse than other trauma?
What makes it worse than other trauma? Well, it does belong in its own category because it's different. Like we say, physical trauma as opposed to psychological trauma, they manifest that, like, the symptoms of physical trauma manifest differently to psychological trauma. A subsection of psychological trauma can be sexual. A subsection of physical trauma can be sexual. I would want to know. I would want that. I wouldn't want to be given a client and just, oh, they're traumatized. If it was sexual trauma, I would need to know that, because of the unique ways that it affects the personality, the unique ways that it affects people's ability to function in the world, where they're going to get problems in their life. So yeah, no, it's I wouldn't say it's worse than other trauma necessarily, but it absolutely, these things do deserve their own categories. It's really helpful.
Are there any known coping mechanisms you might know for emotional flashbacks during sleep, almost like night terrors? Is this due to the nature of the trauma?
I again strongly recommend that you do the work. I know it's boring and takes discipline, but everything is boring and takes discipline in adulthood, unfortunately. The exercises, the audio, the written exercises that are given on the Fortress Mental Health Protection System YouTube channel, it is free. I'm not sales pitching you. It's completely for free. It does wonders for my karma. We have to focus in waking life on reducing. It's very, very simple objectives. Very simple objectives. So you have emotional flashbacks. So we want, over time, slowly and gently, over weeks and months, to reduce the intensity of those emotional flashbacks in your waking life and the frequency of those emotional flashbacks in your waking life. We then need you to become more emotionally literate, which is a process that's described over on the Fortress Mental Health Protection System channel on YouTube. Your unconscious will adapt then to that. Your unconscious is giving you these emotional flashbacks in your sleep, not to torture you, but because you feel unsafe. And it thinks that your unconscious is guiding this, and it thinks that you're unsafe right now. So we have to lead you back to a place where you feel safer and where you can convince the unconscious that you are safe and that your unconscious can stop doing this, that it's not helping. The emotional flashbacks are kind of like an alarm going off. It's boring, it's repetitive, and it's annoying, but the purpose of an alarm is not to titillate and entertain, it's to force you to take action, which is why it induces suffering in a certain sense. So that would be my advice. Who is the dude who's reading out the questions? That's Jacob of Liverpool Podcast Studios. George. Can you show your face, or is that not possible?
Not possible.
No.
Unless I can sit on your lap.
And that could be an entirely different type of podcast, one that they should pay for. If you want to see Jacob, you can go over to my Instagram, which is richard.grannon, and look in my stories, and you will see the lovely Jacob. Beautiful boy, Jacob.
What are your thoughts on the therapeutic value of hypnosis to retrieve repressed memories?
No. My answer is no. Now, if you want to do it, okay. If you have done it and it's been good for you, okay. You'll notice I never advocate for this. Number one, I don't care about your repressed memories, and you shouldn't either. There's a myth. It's a very stubborn myth, very long-lasting myth. I think it's enforced by the way therapy and trauma is portrayed in films. Because, say, for example, there's a film. It's called Jacob's Ladder, actually. Have you seen Jacob's Ladder?
No. That's
actually a good movie. It's with Tim Robbins. He's a Vietnam vet. And in order to explore flashbacks, PTSD flashbacks in movies, we have to show them. We have to, like, there's an interior shot of a guy in a club with his girlfriend. and he's drinking and there's people dancing around him and the camera's like pointing at him here. And so you get this weird claustrophobic thing and he's drinking and the camera's too close and he's doing this and he's looking around and he thinks he sees demons at the corner of his vision, and then the camera flashes away to like people dancing, but in the corners of the vision, there's like demons' wings and tails, and you can hear this sound in the background, and it's spooky, it's weird, it's frightening. And then it flashes faster and faster from him dancing to the demon's wings to him being in a jungle in Vietnam and doing stuff, and it cuts like that. Jacob's Ladder is an example. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just like, well, what are you going to, like, if you want to make PTSD and trauma dramatic and cinematically watchable, what the hell else are you going to do? I mean, you could do talk therapy scenes like they did in Good Will Hunting, and that's good as well. It's a different way of doing it. But it's enforced, in my humble opinion, the idea that trauma, healing, and visual memory are intrinsically linked. And there's really no evidence for that. There's really zero evidence for that. So this thing, which we can see in the division between PTSD and CPTSD, what are the dividing lines? Well, one of them is like visual memory of a traumatic event. That would be classed as PTSD, and it should be singular. Singular doesn't mean it should have only happened once, but singular would mean, here's a real example. Like it's based on a TED talk. It was a Marine who came back from Afghanistan, and they couldn't stop him from driving his truck in the middle of the road. So he would be on the correct side of the road in America, which would be the right, disgusting colonials on the wrong side of the road. And then he'd drift into the center, and they're like, what the hell's your problem? And because in Afghanistan, they move away from the sides of the road because that's where the IEDs are. So what's the traumatic memory that's making him drift to the center? Well, he remembers the time that there was an explosion and the armored vehicle, was flipped upside down and there was glass shattered and the smell of the fuel, people screaming, and, horror is the memory of the trauma. And that's intrinsic to how his trauma plays out. But actually, that division is kind of false. There isn't really a dividing line between PTSD and CPTSD. I continue to use the terms, but I know there's never PTSD without CPTSD. There's no such thing as CPTSD without PTSD. In a way, we're doing what George Carlin railed against. We're using too many words. We should still be using, and George Carlin, I believe, was right, we should use the older terminology and we'd be closer to the truth. We should talk about combat fatigue or battle shock, like you're in shock, you're traumatized, you're going into shock, and it would be more useful. You don't need your visual memories. And so that was point number one, because it's physical. It's in the body, it's in the brain, it's in your hormonal system, it's within the hypothalamic, pituitary, HPA, adrenal axis, the HPA axis, and it's dysregulated. So your threat detection mechanism is physically dysregulated. There's a chance that your hippocampus might have actually shrunk. So your brain changes shape in response to trauma. Do you need to know your memories? No, I don't believe so. Repressed memories. Well, what? So then you get to point number two, like go read the research on the actual published peer-reviewed research on this a bogey monster called repressed memories. It's weak. It's a weak psychological concept. It has very little scientific validity. And then the third thing would be to look at how easy it is to induce false memories in people. Sane people, sober people, people not under the influence of drugs, alcohol, psychedelics, or terror can have fake memories induced inside of their minds in a replicable way inside of about 30 seconds. Psychologists have done this again and again. So I am not attached to memory. I don't think it's useful. It's too easy for it to be faked. And I think there is a superstition a cult-like superstitious attachment to repressed memories. I'm not saying that some memories aren't repressed. They absolutely are. We know this. That under extreme cases of trauma, your memories will get repressed. Maybe your body and your brain is right to repress them. Like, why are we fishing them out? What do you need that horror for? Maybe it's too horrifying. What do you need it back for? No, you need to heal the central nervous system that is here today. And that's all you can do, is the healing of the body, the brain, the consciousness as it presents itself here today. Don't worry too much about repressed memories.
What is your opinion on specifically dealing with limiting beliefs and changing them to healthy beliefs in order to overcome trauma and heal?
That is, it's good, but back to front. So when you do the work and you overcome trauma and heal, your limiting beliefs will dissipate. Could you try to overcome trauma and heal by going for the beliefs first? No, you won't. You won't heal that way. So put another way, what is trauma? What is PTSD? A lot of it is when our map. So you're talking beliefs, limiting beliefs. That's a map of reality. So your map of reality and your unconscious rules say this, this, and this. And you have this whole map figured out. And then there's an event that occurs. Oh, God bless you, Jacob. A bit of water for me. Thank you. I'm a thirsty hoe. Then something happens that's outside of your map of reality. And there is evidence to suggest that a lot of PTSD and CPTSD is actually rooted in shock. It's not conclusive, but it was strongly indicative. They ran these experiments with American soldiers going to war, and it was this is a field of interest for me. This is what I wrote my dissertation on when I was at university, which is American military use of psychology. Going back to Project Jedi and the book that's called The Men Who Stare at Goats. Anthony Robbins was involved in it. Richard Bandler was involved in it. So I've had an interest in this since I was like 15 years old. One of the things that was attempted was to teach frontline infantrymen what actual combat would be like, to show them video clips, to let them hear the sound of what it would be like, and then to have them visualize in the first person what it would be like if things went horribly wrong in a combat zone. And they claimed, and I don't see any reason to not believe them because it matches my understanding of everything and my experience of training people to deal with violence, of which I had 15 years of doing. If you train people to subjectively experience the violence before it happens, their capacity to cope with said violence goes up massively. Its shock occurs when we don't have the pre-existing software to deal with what is put in front of us. So you're asking me about limiting beliefs. If your map of reality doesn't cover the horror that you're faced with, in a certain sense, the map of reality sort of tears and breaks a little bit, and that's part of the shock. We overcome trauma when we have the neuroplasticity to change our map of reality so that it more closely matches real reality. And then we heal. So it's not just limiting beliefs, it's all beliefs have to sort of change in order for us to move forward. This is why religious revelation can induce psychological healing. This is why therapy can induce psychological healing. This is why psychedelics can induce psychological healing. The key to it all is neuroplasticity. The key to it all is mental flexibility so that your map can adapt to the world as is. And oftentimes it's about accepting evil, accepting that real evil really exists in this world. And that's where I sort of put psychology down and I ask people to move into philosophy, a moral philosophy, and then beyond moral philosophy into religion and spirituality, which I believe all human beings need to survive this crazy world. Oh, you can star the questions that you like, can you?
Yeah, I've been looking at them in advance and lining them all up.
Nice, mate. Done. Don't use drugs.
It sounds so good through the headphones.
Like crispy vaping. Sorry, everybody.
I've got the book already. Great work.
Thank you.
Question, Richard, can you maybe talk a bit about body exercises like the mudra you described in chapter 9 on page 141 in the book? Thanks.
I'll let people read that thing for themselves. So I did psychedelics recently. Well, about a year and a half ago. I did it in Switzerland, of all places. I took ayahuasca. And I received my revelation from Mother Ayahuasca. She told me many a thing, and I was asking her about this work that I do with people. And she said, she was like, what do you want to know? I said, how can I do this better? And she was like, what are you boring me with these stupid questions for? You're doing your good job now, aren't you? I went, I don't know, am I? She's like, yes, it's fine. Just keep doing what you're doing. She's very grumpy, not very friendly and spiritual at all. And I said, well, there must be something. And she said, okay, I'll give you something. Stop pretending that the body and mind are separate. You are one being. There's no body. There's no mind. There's a body-mind. So, as I said earlier, like trauma really is in the body. Talk therapy works to the extent that it allows your body to catch up with what's happened. Are there physical things that we should be doing to assist with trauma recovery? Yes. Why don't I talk about them very much? Well, there's things that I do, but I'm very wary of being accused of being like trying to start a cult or being ableist but I can tell you I wouldn't be here without dance. I take dance classes. Don't laugh. How dare you? Jacob's laughing. I go to bachata classes. I go to yoga. I've been doing martial arts since I was 8 years old, and you'll find me in the gym 4 or 5 days a week, and I really don't know what I would do without it. So to be able to oxygenate your body, to be able to get the blood flowing, I love walking outside. I love getting in nature. I love it. Like, it makes me high. I can snort a line of forest and get really high. I can drop a tab of mountain and get super high. I look at the stars and I'll be like, wow, I wish I want to be one of those people who makes their friends do things, like your friends in a cult. And then they're like, oh, you have to do this chanting with me. I feel that way about the stars. I'm like, I'm going to get every fucker I know and make them lie on the grass with me. How many shooting stars have you seen in your life, Jacob?
Probably one.
I've seen over 40.
40?
Over 40, because I sit there for hours on end staring at the stars.
Where? There's too much light pollution in Liverpool.
There's a shit ton of light pollution here, but Ibiza is amazing. I managed to rent a farm. Well, this happened twice in Spain, where I got into the outback, where there's no light pollution, and I would just lie on my back for hours and just look at the sky. But I'm always looking up. Always look up. I actually saw the tail end of an asteroid land in a field not far from me in Spain.
Really?
Years ago. Yeah. It's weird, right? So something from space, I was on my veranda, something that had come from space, it breaks up, it breaks down, and it comes in hot. I'm amazed it doesn't kill more people, maybe because the Earth is so big and we live in these tight populated areas.
How big was it?
By the time it had got through, like a brick, but it was a mess. There was stuff. It was still collapsing. So I don't know if it had hit somebody in the head. I'm sure they would have fucking died.
Well, have you heard recently that they managed to the one was headed towards Earth, but they sent it towards it to knock it off its track?
That sounds like something from a movie.
No, I read it in the news the other day.
It was a real thing?
Yeah.
What did they send up there?
I don't know, but it was meant to be an asteroid the size of a football pitch headed towards Earth.
That's not good, is it?
They've derailed it, basically.
And pushed it to one side.
Yeah.
I would say with all that, like if you're outside and you can look at the sky, light pollution is a problem for sure. Watch storms, look at clouds. If it's night, look at the stars. I did it once in Joshua Tree, which is a national park in America, and it was so overwhelming. I wasn't sure whether I was going to cry, wet myself, or have a nervous breakdown. In Joshua Tree at night, it's full, and like a city person's brain, because I'm a city person, looks at it and you're just like, there shouldn't be that much stuff there. There's just a ton of stuff. Joshua Tree, and stars, maybe. I don't know if you can look that up, but that was a beautiful place to do it. So I don't even know what the question was. I started tripping about stars.
Wow. I'm just going to show the viewers.
Oh,
this.
yeah. Check this out.
Yeah.
And these are like psychedelic experiences, you know. If you sit there for long enough, you will start to trip. Psychedelic just means mind expanding. So it's not just drugs that can be psychedelic. Anything that's mind expanding can do the trick. But you lie there. Wait, look at this for mind expanding. We're in Inception. You lie there staring at the stars for long enough and do nothing. Don't play music. Don't talk. Don't do anything. I just lie there and look at stuff and let thoughts come. And you'll start having some crazy thoughts. You'll have like these really weird reality bending, reality melting thoughts. Because a lot of what we think, we're thinking inside of somebody else's rigid box. We're thinking inside of a matrix of cultural conditioning. But if you just lie there and you stare at the stars for like 45 minutes, that cultural conditioning starts to fall away. And you'll be like, oh, wow, the ancient Egyptian religious practices make a lot more sense now, man. You'll start heading into your past lives. You'll see yourself as a pharaoh. It's amazing. Back
on track.
Oh, yeah, body exercises. Yeah. Get to the gym, move around. There are body-based therapeutic methods. I've not been overwhelmingly impressed with anything that I've seen, but I'm going to go back to California this month. My sister is now trained in breath work. I think she's a trained yoga coach now as well. She does massage therapy, and I think she's going to look at combining trauma work with massage, breath work, and yoga. She's based in Encinitas, if people want to work with her. If you look up, if you follow me on Instagram, I'll post her stuff. It's North County Bodywork. So yeah, you are a body, you are a mind, you are all things. You are perfect, you are beautiful. You are made of the same stuff that the stars are, man. You're God's thought. He's thinking himself through you. Making myself trip. Is there an exercise that helps you differentiate between fear and instinct? Whoa. Fear and instinct. I'm not sure I would know what the difference between fear and instinct would be. Like fear probably is an instinct. If you mean like intuition, maybe between fear and intuition, this sounds like an issue maybe where over time you've become, or one can become through trauma, less emotionally literate. So then you're struggling to identify what your own feelings are. And then everything gets a little bit locked up, like emotionally constipated, and we lose track of our own emotional intelligence. Once our emotional intelligence is switched off, we lose our intuition. I think that might be the question you're asking me. Emotional literacy would be the fix. Let me take this little glass of mezcal in here.
Put double vodka in there for you, mate.
This will be a psychedelic experience.
Does the book discuss managing complicated grief?
No. It discusses the necessity to be able to grieve effectively, but what you're asking is a specific that probably would be best dealt with a face-to-face with a therapist who specializes in this. I've been to this type of therapy before. Seeing a grief specialist can be extremely powerful, but we must reclaim our power to grieve. It's very important. That's also a psychedelic experience. It also generates neuroplasticity. Grieving generates more neuroplasticity than anything else. And when people report their psychedelic experiences, if they're very powerful and they create big shifts, they'll report a massive amount of grieving and of letting go.
Just trying to pick relevant.
We've got about 10, 15 minutes to go, folks. So if you could give us a question that's like one sentence long-ish, ending in a question mark.
Oh, here's a good one.
That would be great.
What do you think will happen after death to people and to animals? I thought it was relevant with what we're talking about.
Yeah, man. You will return to the stars from whence you came. I think like death is the end of happening. Happening is karma. Karma is cause and effect. And death for us as an individual is the end of the happening for the individual, but it's not the end of life. So karma continues. We breathe in, we breathe out. I had another psychedelic thought recently, and I was listening to a bachata track. I like listening to bachata when I'm driving. There's a woman, she's from Spain. She does like, it's like flamenco music, sort of flamenco gypsy style music. Her name is Nina Pastori. She doesn't usually do bachata, but she did a bachata track called Lo que yo daría, which means what I would give. And the theme of the song is, what would one do just for love, just for care? And I don't know, I'd been reading something that was like Christian religious that morning, and the two thoughts were rocking around inside of my head as I was doing the drive between Liverpool and London. And in the Christian tradition, we say, and God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And the son dies and then is reborn. And that's us. That's us. We're all that son, all that daughter that dies and is reborn. So all of us die, but there are more children born. So humans come, humans go. They breathe in, they breathe out. You're born, you die, and then born again, and then die, and then born again. What for? What for? What does it mean? What is the mystery behind that phrase? For God so loved the earth that he gave his only son to die, to suffer, to die, and then be reborn. And it's an interesting route into exploring the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness. Why are we here? Every night we go to sleep. We close our eyes. Christ goes into a cave, and then the cave is hermetically sealed with a rock. We go to the grave. We go into, so the cave is yin. It's the ultimate feminine space. You go into that place as you go into your bed, which is a yin space of safety, and then your eyes close like the lids on a coffin, and they close. What happens to your consciousness? Now, if you notice and you do lucid dreaming and meditation, it's quite a fun time to become aware, is when you start to go to sleep. And if you track it, you can observe, like with curiosity and a sense of humor, your normal waking thoughts, like I've got to get the dog dewormer tomorrow at 4, and I have to buy socks, and then I have to go to the bank, and so on and so forth. And then your thoughts just go really weird. You like start thinking weird stuff. And if you're aware, you can think, oh, wow, I'm dreaming now. I'm sort of in this other space that isn't here. And you lose your individuality. You lose the individual sense of self. It's fascinating. I think that's a fascinating time. I had another weird dream that's pertinent to your question. And I was doing this lucid dreaming thing, and I was an alien, and I'm not sure what my form was, but there was this, I was out in space, which is where aliens live, right? And there was this huge tube that was like floating next to a planet, and inside the tube was a predator, and it was making this god-awful screaming sound. And the entity that I was in this dream state was like, oh, let's go into the tube and see what the alien is, because I was like an alien, but I was like a scientist. And then my human brain started dreaming lucidly and became terrified, and it became a nightmare, because I was like, I could get stuck in the tube and that alien predator thing could eat me. But in the dream that I was having before my human egoic sense of self kicked in, I didn't have a shape. I didn't have a form. I couldn't get stuck and I couldn't get eaten because I didn't have flesh. But then when I started to become me, I was like, no, my shoulders won't fit in there. And then this horrible demon alien thing is going to slowly dissolve me and spit acid, and I'm going to die screaming. So then I woke up and I was like, oh, wow. So like fear is in the flesh. Fear is in the flesh. Back to the Christ story before. What happens to Christ? He's tortured. He's humiliated. But it's his flesh that's tortured. It's a myth that has a lot locked into it, that if we start pulling it apart, I think that it tells us a lot about the nature of reality and the purpose of consciousness. So why is he tortured? Why is he stripped naked and whipped? Why is he stripped naked, whipped, and then held on high so everyone can see him slowly being tortured to death? That's fear. That's the flesh. The flesh is fear. If you don't have flesh, what do you fear? I'm not going to be scared of some dumb alien. If I don't, what's he going to do to me if I don't have arms to pull off or skin to flay? Like, wow, you're screaming. I guess that's scary. You have big teeth to sink into what? I'm not a thing. So what happens after death? We de-thing. We de-thing. We're not an individual thing anymore. We're not this. We're not a localized person with a name and a bank account and a national insurance number. We just de-thing. We dissipate and go back into the ocean of consciousness. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's a tremendous relief and a tremendous release. But that is what happens. It's night and day, eyes open, eyes closed, breathe in, breathe out. We die and we are reborn. We've been here many times before. And I don't necessarily mean that in like a weird reincarnation sense, but the me that is me is so incredibly similar to my ancestors that if an alien came along, they would see this swarming mass of maggots called humans and be like, oh, there you are again. Oh, you're dead. Oh, there you are again. Oh, you're dead. Oh, there you are again. And they'd talk to me. And I'd be like, well, I don't remember any of my previous lives. And like, you don't need to, you dummy. We saw you before. We saw you before. We saw you before. It's a different way of looking at reality. If you're very attached to your ego and your sense of self and your body, death is terrifying. If you can detach and expand your perception beyond that, what's to be scared of?
It's an interesting one. What's the strongest hit that you have taken from a new belief in philosophy?
I don't know. What's that question mean? What was the biggest disadvantage from a new belief in philosophy, or?
To me, it seems like what's like the like a revelation that you've got from like a new belief or something.
From philosophy specifically, I think philosophically speaking, the biggest hit was probably last year. I finished reading The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and at the same time, or no, it was 6 months before I'd finished Thus Spake Zarathustra by Nietzsche. And the sense, I became convinced through their writing. They wrote in similar themes, but in very different ways in the 1880s, where the zeitgeist was moving in a certain direction. I became convinced that they were both right, that the loss of God as such was a disaster for humanity and opened up the gateways to hell that led to like the horrors of World War I, World War II. And I'm not a God person. I'm not a religion person, really. Like I don't have God to sell. I don't have religion to sell. But the way they describe it, where there's a structure to reality, there's a way that people can understand their place in reality. And at the very top of that, if there isn't a God or a religion or a spiritual belief that is intrinsically humble, where we say, okay, I didn't make myself, if that capstone is taken off the pyramid of the human experience, what goes there in its place is humanity. So if I don't have God as the capstone, if you just remove it, you don't have to tell me to put myself there. As a human being, I spontaneously and naturally put myself there. And narcissism is the end result. And that's the phase of life that we're living, the phase of history that we're living through now. We're at the top of the pyramid, and it's going to have disastrous consequences. And that was tough. That was a tough one. I'm still wrapping my head around that one. But I'm very hopeful because I think that like human beings are intrinsically, we're biologically religious, spiritual, mystical creatures. And I think it will come back. I think many of us are realizing that this experiment has not worked out very well, and that we probably need to reorganize our sense of reality again.
Question: is there a safe way to explore psychedelics in a therapeutic way without paying thousands?
Well, psychedelics aren't expensive anyway. Is there a safe way to explore psychedelics? No, psychedelics are not safe. They're intrinsically not safe. MDMA, like controlled dosages of MDMA, if we look at the scientific literature, and controlled dosages of ketamine, looking at the scientific literature, seem to have very consistent results. The problem with psychedelics is you're always at risk of inducing psychosis. So too much neuroplasticity is always a risk because psychedelics are quite rough. So there's a gap between the way people talk about psychedelics and there's like a psychedelic culture, let's say online, where people say, oh, DMT allowed me to do this, and ayahuasca cured my depression, and acid let me write this book and discover the double helix of DNA. And I'm like, well, where are all the stories of people just being eaten alive by demons for 12 hours? Where are all the stories of people going completely bonkers and ending up in institutions? That ayahuasca ceremony I described before, there was a girl who was on the floor completely struggling. I couldn't do anything to help her because I wasn't sober. I was high. I had my own stuff to deal with. And she was clearly terrified. She was terrified. And I was like, well, this is not, psychedelics should be treated with a good degree of fear and reverence. There's stuff there that you might not be able to cope with. So who did I speak to recently? I didn't speak to him. I watched him talk. There is a professor from Greenwich University called Professor David Duke, D-U-K-E. I can't speak English. D-U-K-E. You can follow him on Instagram, and he's doing research he's Dr. or Professor David Duke. He's doing research in this area. You can follow him. What I would say right now is no to psychedelics for therapy. If you must do drugs, there are other modalities, but I don't see drugs as being necessary. Yoga, breath work, talk therapy, exhaust all natural means first, because drugs can have strange and unpredictable outcomes. The television is telling me that there's no operation performed for a long time and it wishes to shut down.
Oh, dear.
See, if you don't use it, you lose it. This is atrophy in action. We'll take a couple more questions, folks, and then we'll wrap for the night. We have been talking about my book, which is called A Cult of One, which is available right now from Amazon. Jacob will show you this wondrous book that I have not myself read from cover to cover because I'm terrified of it.
Right.
Let's do two more and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, let's get some fresh ones then.
Fresh and funky.
Let's get some fresh ones. Let's see. I mean, feel free if you see any that you. There's literally been like thousands of them, so apologies if I'm not reading your question.
You should all go out and look at the stars tonight if you can.
Yeah.
I'll sing you a song if you like.
Someone said that they like the vaping streams. I also like the vaping streams.
Oh, yeah? Oh, from Richard Grannon and Friends.
Just where you'd, on the podcast, take a moment and go...
Give it a big old vape and then start talking about the stars. See, the thing with Ibiza was that it was populated originally by the ancient Sumerians, so they've left their traces of their DNA behind there. That's why I start tripping there when I stare at the stars.
Anything you see? How do you keep yourself humble, being a public figure?
Well, I don't live my life as a public figure. I don't wake up and go, I am Richard Grannon and I seem to be awake right now. Better tell the world that the Lord and Master is here. I stay sort of dissociated from that because I don't really know what to do with it anyway. So sometimes a guy came up to me in the street today and was saying thank you to me for something. And I just try to be polite because I don't know what it means and I don't know what to do with it. And I've seen people go absolutely mad when they fall in love with their own fame or their own publicity. And so I just don't just remember that I'm a dickhead. I'm just a worm in socks.
Just a wool.
I'm just a fucking wool lad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of statements, not a lot of questions I can see here. Let's see. Here you go. Would you say that your work with Sam has been helpful / inspiring in you writing your book?
Well, my relationship with Sam Vaknin is helpful and inspiring. That book doesn't include... Sam's referenced in that book like 5 or 6 times as it pertains to narcissism. There's another book that I want to write that has more of Sam's work in it, the dual mothership issue. I think is fascinating. But at a personal level, Sam is enormously helpful and inspiring for me. I don't think I'd still be doing what I do now if it wasn't for Sam. So people whinge online, they're like, oh, he's evil and he's horrible. There would be no Spartan Life Coach if there was no Sam Vaknin. The Spartan Life Coach, this YouTube channel would have been closed down in 2015 if Sam hadn't intervened and stopped me from doing that. And then recently he's helped me again. I have a really good relationship with Sam. So he is helpful and inspiring. My relationship with him is generally helpful and inspiring. I always enjoy... really, I treasure the time I get to spend with Sam. He's very funny as well. If you can don't try and become friends with him. Don't just leave him alone. But if you do become friends with him, you can spend, if you can, like after a seminar or something, if you can go for a drink with him or go for some food with him, I recommend it because he's a fascinating guy and very generous with his time. If you are polite, be polite.
I have a good one to end on.
Let's go.
What's the most terrifying thing about humanity to you?
I don't know. Do I find anything particularly terrifying about humanity? What terrifies me now? I don't think I find anything particularly terrifying about anything. When was the last time I was terrified?
Maybe not terrifying to you, but just to the world.
What's terrifying about humanity? Terrifying. Nothing really. Nothing. People are just people. We're at a certain stage in our evolution. You could start going on about the evil that we're capable of and genocide and all of that. But we're growing. We're growing and we're trying to learn. We're trying to do better. The worst in a population of humans, the people who are probably not the best representations of people will get to the top and they'll actively seek power over the rest. It's actually probably a marker for moral depravity is to seek to be in control over other people, which doesn't say much for our politicians. I'm not, you shouldn't be terrified of humanity. You shouldn't be terrified of people. We're okay. We're okay. We're not perfect, but nothing in this world is. And we're getting better. And I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in the future of humanity, even through the catastrophes that will come and the disasters that will come. Karma will keep happening. History will keep unfolding. But beyond every disaster and every catastrophe, we will grow. We'll get better. And I'm very optimistic.
Good to end on a positive.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for spending this time with me. I hope that you found it useful. Thank you to Jacob of Liverpool Podcast Studios. If you're looking for a podcast and you're in the Northwest, I cannot recommend Liverpool Podcast Studios highly enough. You should do it here. And so, yes, thank you all for your time and for your attention. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Cheers.